My name is Clara, and I'm 47 years old. I had never been the kind of woman who rushed into things. After raising 2 kids alone and working 3 jobs to keep the house warm and the fridge stocked, love wasn't something I sought. It was something I stopped believing in. But then came Daniel. He walked into the bank one cold Wednesday morning, asking for help with an investment portfolio his late mother had left behind. I was the assistant manager, and though I wore my best blazer and had my hair tucked neatly into a bun, I felt my heart flutter when he smiled. It wasn't the smile of a rich man. It was the smile of a man who had known loss, just like me. We started having coffee during lunch breaks, long walks in the park, and slow dinners in quiet corners of town. He was 53, a widower, and kinder than anyone I'd met in years. He listened. He remembered things I'd said weeks before. And he looked at me like I was the only one in the room. 6 months later, he proposed. He held out a simple ring by the riverside, on a bench where we first kissed. And I said yes, without hesitation, for the first time in decades. I thought that night by the river was the most vulnerable I'd ever feel. I was wrong, because a week later, on the night of our engagement dinner, I faced something I never imagined. Judgment so sharp, it nearly sliced through my skin. The table was full. Daniel's brothers, their wives, some cousins. His father, Harold, sat at the head of the table, his fingers adorned with gold rings, his watch glinting like a warning. He was a man who'd built businesses, lost a few, and still held power like it was a weapon. I wore my navy blue dress, the only one that made me feel both beautiful and respectable. I brought a bottle of wine I couldn't afford, and I smiled, even when no one met my eyes. The food was served, the wine poured. Laughter danced around the table, but never in my direction. Then Harold raised his glass. "To Daniel," he said, voice deep and slow, "and to his decision." I forced a smile. "To Clara," Daniel added, gently nudging my arm, "the love of my life." A few clinks, a few polite sips, then silence. Harold cleared his throat, leaned forward, and locked eyes with me. "I suppose," he began, "that in today's world, it's easy to fall in love with a bank account." My blood turned cold. I looked at Daniel. He was sipping his wine. Then he laughed, not a belly laugh, not a defensive laugh, but a light chuckle, like what his father said wasn't completely absurd. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Harold leaned back, pleased with himself. "No offense, Clara, but when a woman like you comes along, after years of silence, claiming love for a man like my son, I call it what it is." I swallowed hard. A calculated risk. The table remained frozen. Someone coughed. Someone else pretended to read the label on their water bottle. I looked at Daniel again. He wasn't laughing anymore, but he also wasn't defending me. I stood up, slowly. "I didn't come here for your approval," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "I came because I love your son, and I thought, maybe I could be part of your family." Harold didn't blink. Daniel stood then. "Dad, that's enough." But it was too late. I grabbed my coat, my purse. "I won't be spoken to like this," I said. "Not by a man who knows nothing about me." "Then enlighten us," Harold said. "What should we know, Clara? That you work at a bank and saw a golden opportunity? That you're tired of budgeting and want a shortcut to luxury?" Daniel muttered something, but I couldn't hear it. I was too busy trying not to cry. I walked out. The air outside was colder than I expected. My hand shook as I buttoned my coat. Daniel didn't come after me right away. When he did, he found me leaning against my car, wiping tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. "Clara, don't." I turned away. "He didn't mean it that way." "Didn't he?" I snapped. "And what about you, Daniel?" "You laughed. You laughed like it was funny." He rubbed his face, exhaled. "I was nervous. I wasn't expecting him to say that." "You didn't defend me." "I did." "No, you didn't. Not when it mattered." He was silent. The legal battle dragged on for 6 months. Harold's lawyers pushed every technicality. They argued Daniel was emotionally unstable, manipulated, incapable of protecting his own assets. They claimed I was the cause. But in every hearing, Daniel stood tall, calm, clear. And in the final session, something remarkable happened. Harold showed up, alone. When the judge asked if he wanted to maintain the case, Harold stood, took a breath, and said, "No. I withdraw all claims." Gasps filled the courtroom. He looked at us. "I lost my wife. I nearly lost my son. I won't lose what's left of my family." Daniel and I didn't cheer. We didn't cry. We simply nodded. Sometimes victory is silent. From that day on, Harold changed. He came to foundation meetings, not as a leader, but as a volunteer. He helped clean, organize, serve food. He listened more than he spoke. And one evening, at a fundraising dinner, he stood up and said, "I used to think inheritance was about money. Now I know. It's about legacy." Our lives settled into a peaceful rhythm. The Clara Foundation grew. My classes expanded into a full financial wellness program across 3 towns. Daniel began mentoring young entrepreneurs, helping them grow businesses with compassion instead of greed. We bought a modest home near the lake. We filled it with laughter, warmth, and open doors for those who needed shelter, not just from storms, but from the world. One night, as we sat by the fireplace, Daniel took my hand. "Do you ever regret saying yes to me?" he asked. I looked at him, and my heart swelled. "No," I whispered, "because saying yes to you meant saying yes to myself, to faith, to a future I thought was gone." He pulled me close, and just before I closed my eyes, I remembered a verse Miss Loretta once shared. "Beauty will rise from ashes, a crown of joy instead of mourning." It wasn't just a promise, it was our story. And I knew then, with every scar, every loss, every broken piece, we had been shaped not by wealth, but by grace. I looked at him, this man who made me feel seen for months, and suddenly made me feel invisible. I've been poor. I've been humiliated, but never by someone I loved. He reached for my hand. I pulled it away. "I thought we were building something real," I whispered. "But if you can stand there and let your father tear me down." "Maybe I was wrong. I'm sorry," he said. But it was too soft, too late. I opened my car door. "I need time," I said, "to think, to breathe." And I drove away. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the ring on my finger. The silence of my empty house was louder than ever. And somewhere in my heart, a crack began to form. Because I realized something painful. Sometimes, the people who say they love you don't know how to protect you. The next morning, I sat in my tiny backyard, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun rise with a bitter taste in my mouth. The ring was still on my finger. I hadn't taken it off, not yet. Maybe because part of me still hoped. My neighbor, Evelyn, 63, peeked over the fence like she always did when the kettle started whistling in her kitchen. He didn't come back with you last night, she said. No, I replied. He didn't. She walked around and let herself into my yard without asking, because that's who Evelyn was. She sat beside me, her coffee steaming. You want to talk about it? His father called me a golddigger at our engagement dinner. She blinked. You're kidding. I wish. She took a slow sip, her eyes narrowing. And Daniel. I hesitated. He laughed. Silence. Evelyn shook her head slowly. Some men, they forget a woman's worth when their family walks in the room. We sat there, not speaking, for a while. The neighborhood was waking up. Kids running to catch school buses, dogs barking, lawn sprinklers ticking on. My life had been quiet for years. After my ex-husband disappeared with our savings and left me with 2 toddlers and a stack of unpaid credit cards, I rebuilt everything, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. I never told Daniel that I'd once sold my grandmother's wedding ring to pay for a carton of milk and school shoes, or that the word luxury made me nervous. He didn't know the full story, and maybe that was my fault. Evelyn placed her hand on mine. You've come too far to let anyone make you feel small again. I nodded, but inside, I was drowning. That week, I went back to work and kept my head down. At the bank, customers smiled at me, and I smiled back. But I couldn't focus. Every time someone mentioned investments or wealth, my chest tightened. 3 days later, Daniel showed up at the branch. He waited until my break, then walked with me to the small park behind the building. He held out a paper bag. Your favorite, chicken salad on rye. I took it, unsure if I was ready to eat or talk. He sighed. Clara, I messed up. I know I did. You think? I should have said something to my dad. I should have stood up. I was just caught off guard. That's not good enough, I said, my voice shaking. You've known me for 6 months. Have I ever asked you for money? Have I ever acted like your wealth mattered? No, he admitted. Never. So why was your first instinct to laugh when he questioned my integrity? I don't know, he said. Maybe because I was scared he was right. I froze. He ran his hands through his hair. Not because I think that, but because I've never seen him approve of anyone. And I guess, deep down, I was hoping he would. And I was the price for that approval. No, he said firmly. You're not a price. You're everything I've been looking for. Then why didn't you protect me? His eyes glistened, and for the first time, he looked small, vulnerable. I never had to choose between love and family before, but if I have to now, I'll choose you. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a letter. I wrote this the night you left. Read it when you're ready. Then he kissed my hand and walked away. I didn't open the letter right away. Instead, I found myself at church the next evening. The pews were empty except for an old woman humming softly near the altar. I sat in the back, staring at the stained glass. For the first time in a long while, I prayed. Not for answers, but for strength. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. A soft voice spoke behind me. It was the pastor's wife, Miss Loretta. She sat beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I heard what happened, she said gently. I turned to her, surprised. This town is small, Clara, she smiled. But God's grace is bigger. I nodded slowly. Sometimes people won't see your worth until they lose you, she continued. And sometimes they're just afraid of the light you bring into their darkness." Her words stayed with me that night. At home, I finally opened Daniel's letter. It wasn't poetic or polished, but it was raw. He wrote about his late wife, about how his father blamed him for her death in the car accident, how that guilt kept him from standing up for what was right for years. He wrote about meeting me, how I made him feel alive again, how he was tired of living by someone else's approval. I laughed because I was weak, but I'm not laughing now, he wrote. I want to fight for you, for us, if you'll let me. By the time I finished reading, my hands were trembling. Not because I forgave him entirely, but because I finally saw the war he was fighting inside himself. That weekend, I drove out to the old farmhouse where Daniel's mother used to live. He'd mentioned once that he went there to think, to escape the pressure of boardrooms and banks. I didn't call ahead. I needed answers, and I wanted them face to face. When I arrived, he was on the porch, chopping firewood. His jacket was stained with sweat, his expression tense. But when he saw me, his shoulders dropped. I wasn't sure I'd see you again, he said. I stepped closer, the wind brushing my hair across my face. I read your letter. He nodded. And? You want to fight for me? I said. Then we need to start with the truth. I'm ready. Do you believe I'm after your money? He dropped the axe and looked me dead in the eyes. Number, not anymore. Then prove it, I said. Talk to your father. Tell him what he said was wrong. Not just for me, for you. Daniel swallowed hard. He won't listen. That's not the point. The point is that you speak, that you stop letting his voice drown out your own. He sat on the porch steps, wiping his hands on a rag. You're right. I've let him run my life since I was a kid, even after I became a man, even after I lost my wife. I kept thinking I had to earn his respect. I sat beside him. He looked out across the field, but the truth is, I don't need his approval. Not anymore. The next day, he invited his father to lunch. At our place, I was nervous. I almost said no. But part of me wanted to see what Daniel would do with his second chance. Harold arrived in his dark suit, looking like a judge about to deliver a verdict. I served tea. Daniel stood tall. Dad, he began, before we eat, there's something I need to say. Harold raised an eyebrow. What you said about Clara, it was cruel, and it was wrong. I was being honest, Harold replied coldly. No, Daniel said louder. You were being proud, and I let it happen because I've always been afraid of disappointing you. Harold narrowed his eyes. Well, I'm not afraid anymore, Daniel continued. Clara isn't here for my money. She's here despite it. And if you can't respect her, then you can't be part of my life. The silence that followed was suffocating. Harold stood. So this is the woman you choose over your own blood? No, Daniel replied. This is the woman I choose to build a new life with. One that's honest. One that isn't controlled by fear or arrogance. Harold glanced at me, then at Daniel. You're making a mistake, he said. Then it's mine to make, Daniel replied. Harold left without finishing his tea. I stood there, speechless. Daniel turned to me. He'll come around or he won't. But either way, I'm done living for someone else's version of respect. For the first time, I believed him. But things didn't get easier right away. 2 days later, I was called into a meeting at the bank. Apparently, someone had sent an anonymous tip accusing me of using my position to gain insider access to Daniel's investments. The board looked at me with suspicion. After 15 years of spotless work, I felt like a criminal in my own office. I've never touched his accounts, I said, heart pounding. We'll need to suspend you pending a full review, the manager said grimly. I walked out of that office shaking. Daniel was furious. This is my father's doing, he said. He's trying to destroy your name. I can't prove that, I whispered, but it feels like it. That night, I cried in Daniel's arms. All my life, I said, I've worked to be seen as honest, as dependable. And now I'm being dragged through the mud because I dared to fall in love. He kissed my forehead. Then we'll fight this together. I remembered Miss Loretta's words. Sometimes people won't see your worth until they lose you. But I wasn't ready to be lost. Not this time. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The woman who once believed she had nothing left had just been defended by the same man who tried to destroy her. And Daniel had proven that love could be brave. The news about my dismissal didn't take long to circulate. Whispers became questions, and questions became gossip. But then something unexpected happened. Letters started arriving at my doorstep. One from a retired school teacher who said she admired my grace. Another from a single father who remembered how I'd once helped him open a savings account when no one else would. Even Jason, from the bank, sent a bouquet of daisies and a note that simply said, I'm sorry, you deserved better. I wasn't used to being seen, not like this. One evening, Miss Loretta invited me to a small prayer circle at the church. I hesitated, but Evelyn insisted on driving me. There were only 8 women there, some old, some younger than me, all of them carrying something, grief, regret, hope. After we shared scriptures and stories, Loretta reached out and touched my hand. You went through the fire, Clara, she said, and you didn't burn. You purified. I blinked back tears. Another woman, Marta, added softly, sometimes the loss of a job is the beginning of your true calling. I didn't know what that meant yet, but her words stuck. Back home, Daniel was working on a new project. He had left the family board, started liquidating a portion of his inheritance to fund a small foundation. For women, he said, single mothers, survivors, women like you, who rebuild themselves without applause. He called it the Clara Foundation. I didn't know what to say. I was humbled, overwhelmed. You don't need to do this, I told him. I want to, he said. This is what matters now. That night, as I watched him talk with passion and fire in his eyes, I realized something. All the wealth in the world meant nothing if it wasn't used to heal. My own future was unclear. I had no job, no title. But I had a story. And now, I had a voice. I spent the next few weeks in quiet reflection, trying to find purpose in the stillness. Without the routine of bank schedules, endless calls, and lunch at my desk, I had time to breathe and to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried beneath survival. One morning, Evelyn knocked on my door with a folder in hand. You're good with numbers, she said, and with people. So I signed you up to teach. Teach what? I blinked. Financial literacy at the community center. I laughed. You can't just sign me up. I already did. Starts next Monday. And just like that, I found myself in front of a small room with flickering lights and a whiteboard that wouldn't erase properly. My students were a mix. Young mothers, retired truck drivers, women who'd escaped abusive marriages, and even a man who once sold furniture, door to door. I don't know much, I told them that first day. But I know how to survive on pennies. I know how to stretch a meal and build a budget from zero. And I know what it means to rebuild. They leaned in. They listened. And I found something I didn't know I'd lost. Purpose. Meanwhile, Daniel's foundation was gaining attention. Not for its money, but for its mission. He traveled, spoke at conferences, and yet always came home before the sunset. Because, as he said, some things are more sacred than business. We weren't planning a wedding. Not yet. We were healing. And every night we prayed together, hands clasped. One evening, as the light dimmed and crickets chirped outside, Daniel turned to me. "You changed me," he said. "Not just by loving me, but by challenging me. You made me see what kind of man I want to be." I smiled through tears. "And you reminded me that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, stands quietly beside you, and never leaves." I wasn't the woman who first walked into that engagement dinner anymore. I was stronger now. Not because I'd fought, because I'd forgiven. The days that followed felt like a slow-motion storm. I stayed home, suspended, while rumors circled like vultures above the town. Evelyn brought me soup and left it on the porch. Miss Loretta stopped by with a Bible and a prayer, but most people kept their distance, as if fear of scandal might be contagious. Daniel stood by me, every step. He came over every evening with groceries and flowers. He cooked dinner while I stared blankly at the wall. He told jokes I didn't laugh at and reminded me, again and again, that this would pass. But one night, he looked more tired than usual. "You okay?" I asked. He hesitated. "I had a board meeting today. One of the partners wants to dissolve a chunk of my inheritance. He says I'm emotionally compromised." I sat up. "Because of me?" He nodded. "They think I'm distracted. They say I'm putting the company at risk." "Are you?" "No," he said. Then softer. "But maybe I am putting you at risk." I looked at him sharply. "I don't care about money," I said, "but I care about truth, and I care about you." He took my hand. Then we hold on. It wasn't easy. The bank's internal investigation dragged for weeks. They combed through emails, call logs, every transaction I'd touched. They even questioned my colleagues, people I'd trained, mentored, brought coffee to when their kids were sick. One of them, Jason, 31, avoided my eyes in the hallway. "I didn't say anything bad," he told me. "But the board's scared. They think if Daniel sues, we all lose. So they're throwing me under the bus." He didn't deny it. I walked out of the bank with my head high that day, but my spirit was breaking. At home, I found Daniel in the kitchen, chopping onions with too much force. "What happened?" "My father called me," he said. "Told me he'd make it all go away if I walked away from you." I stared at him, stunned. He said I could have my seat back on the board, my investment rights, my name. "And what did you say?" Daniel looked me straight in the eye. I said I already had everything I needed, and her name was Clara. Tears sprang to my eyes. I walked toward him, touched his face. "But Daniel, what if I'm not worth all this loss?" He gripped my hands. "You are, because this us is the only thing that feels real." Later that night, I sat in the dark, Bible in hand, and whispered into the silence, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." And in that moment, I felt it, not relief, not a miracle, but a flicker of peace. Not everything was broken. Not yet. The phone call came on a Monday morning. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee, still in pajamas, when the bank's HR director called. "We've concluded the investigation," she said. "You're cleared. No misconduct found." Relief hit me like a wave. But before I could celebrate, she added, "However, given the publicity, we believe it's best if we part ways. Quietly. A severance package is being prepared." I gripped the edge of the counter. "So, I'm innocent, but still being punished?" She sighed. "We hope this won't reflect poorly on your future opportunities." I hung up before she could finish her rehearsed sympathy. I stood there for a long time, staring at the cabinets, until Daniel arrived and found me still frozen. "They let me go," I said, even though they admitted I did nothing wrong. His face turned red. "I'll sue them." "No," I said. "Let it go." "But it's not fair." "I'm tired, Daniel. I'm tired of fighting battles that weren't mine to start." He hugged me, and I cried into his chest. Later that evening, just as we sat for dinner, a knock came at the door. It was Harold. I didn't want to see him, not after everything. But Daniel stepped outside and closed the door behind him. I heard nothing for several minutes. Then the door opened and Daniel stood there, eyes stormy. "He has something to say," he said. Harold stepped in, hat in hand. "I came to apologize," he said stiffly. I blinked. "I was wrong," he continued, "about you, about the kind of woman you are." I said nothing. "I thought you were chasing his money. Turns out, you're the only one who didn't want it." Still, I said nothing. Harold lowered his eyes. "I made some calls. The accusations against you. They didn't start with me, but I didn't stop them either. I'm sorry." My voice was dry. "Why now?" He met my eyes. "Because I saw the look on my son's face today, and I realized I was about to lose him, and maybe that's the price I pay for pride." A long silence filled the room. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said, "but I am asking you to believe that I'm trying, and that I do want you in this family." I looked at Daniel, then back at Harold. "I don't need your approval," I said, "but I respect your effort." Harold nodded once, then left quietly. Daniel exhaled. That wasn't easy for him. "No," I said, "but it was necessary." Spring arrived slowly, with the scent of rain and blooming jasmine in the air. The Clara Foundation hosted its first event, a small but heartfelt gathering of women who had received microloans, mentorship, and second chances. I stood quietly at the back of the room, watching them speak, watching Daniel light up beside them. He wasn't wearing a suit that day, just jeans and a linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, humble, present, at peace. Then Harold walked in. He wasn't announced. He simply stood by the door, arms crossed, watching the stage as one woman described how a $300 loan had helped her escape a toxic marriage and start her own cleaning business. I moved toward him cautiously. "Didn't think you'd come," I said softly. He glanced at me. "Didn't think I would either." We stood in silence for a moment. Then he said, "You built something?" "With my son. And it's real." I nodded. He cleared his throat. "When I was his age, I thought power came from how much you owned. But now, I see it comes from how much you give." He turned to me. "I can't undo what I did, but if you'll allow it, I'd like to be part of what you're building." I studied his face. Pride still there, but something else now. Humility. "We'll see," I replied. "But it starts with respect." He nodded slowly. "Then That's where I'll begin. Later that evening, as Daniel and I walked home under the stars, he stopped on the sidewalk and pulled a ring from his pocket. "Same ring," he said. "New promise." I stared at it, then at him. "Let's get married," he said. "Not for show, not for tradition, but for the life we're creating together." I smiled. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was stepping into something uncertain. I felt like I was stepping home. The wedding was simple. Just 30 people gathered under the old oak tree behind the church. No tuxedos, no gold-trimmed invitations. Just real people, real love, and a warm breeze that carried laughter through the branches. I wore a dress Evelyn had helped me sew by hand. Lace from her attic, a ribbon from my mother's scarf. Daniel wore his favorite gray suit, the one his late wife once picked out. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about honoring it while stepping into something new. Miss Loretta officiated, and when she asked if anyone objected, the silence was golden. But then, just as I took Daniel's hands, a car pulled up. A man stepped out, dressed sharp with a lawyer's briefcase in hand. I recognized him. He worked for Harold. Whispers rippled through the guests. The man approached, quietly handed Daniel an envelope, and stepped back. Daniel opened it. His hands trembled. "It's a court notice," he said. "My father's trying to freeze a portion of my assets. Claims I'm unfit to manage them since I left the board." The crowd gasped. My heart sank, but I didn't let go of his hands. Miss Loretta raised her voice. "Do you wish to pause the ceremony?" Daniel looked at me, eyes filled with fire. "Number not for anything." We turned back to her. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Cheers erupted, tears flowed, we kissed. The celebration was raw, honest, and full of dancing feet and grateful hearts. But later that night, Daniel sat in our tiny kitchen, shoulders hunched over the legal document. "He wants to make an example of me," he muttered. "One last power move." I placed my hand on his. "Then let him try, because what we've built, no one can freeze that." He looked at me. "Even if we lose everything, we've already gained what matters." He smiled through the worry. "You always know what to say." I leaned in. "Because I already lost it all once. And now, I know. I never want to go back. But if I have to, I won't go alone." We didn't sleep much that night, but we weren't afraid. We were united.